War is the crucible in which we burn. In the fires of battle the past is consumed, and the future born on tongues of flame. No greater fire has there been in our times than the free bloody hours of the Dropsite Massacre. The Civil War of the Horus Heresy marks humanity's history as its single bloodiest campaign. Once noble brothers and fathers rent the galaxy in twain in the name of betrayal, false gods, and hubristic ambition. No other conflict would emulate the atrocities and war crimes committed during the 31st millennium, and one battle above all epitomized the conniving and malevolence of the Traitor Rebellion. For today, we shall elucidate a war zone which sundered 3 full-strength legions and would be remembered with the greatest infamy in Imperial records. This is the tale of the Battle of Isstvan V, the Dropsite Massacre. Mark this day well, my friends. The Emperor's loyalists are heading to their doom. Horus Lupercal, War Master of the Imperium and Primarch of the 16th Legion, denounced the rule of the Master of Mankind and began to tread the path of treachery. Having already culled his own legion and those of his complicit brethren, Primarchs Fulgrim, Angron, and Mortarion, the Lupercal's atrocity of Isstvan III had marked the first great victory in his campaign to usurp the Emperor. Despite his successful plot to cleanse his armies of loyalists, the traitor legions had endured losses and costs in excess of their projections due to the stubborn defiance of heroes such as Saul Tarvitz, Nathaniel Garrow, Tarik Torgadon, and Garviel Loken. 4 legions could never hope to conquer the Imperium, and so it was that the War Master devised plans to rally the rest of his brothers to the fold. Knowing in his heart that the valiant Primarchs Lionel Johnson, Sanguinius, and Rabute Guilliman would never abandon their Genefather, the War Master dispatched the vast contingents of the Dark Angels, Blood Angels, and Ultramarines far from the conflicts of Isstvan. Dispatching his brother Fulgrim, Primarch of the Emperor's Children, to convince his most cherished brother Ferrus Manus to join their cause, the Gorgon of Medusa would be among the mightiest leaders of the rebellion, should he pledge his allegiance. Meeting with the Gorgon within his Anvilarium aboard his flagship, Fist of Iron, the Phoenician attempted to sway the Iron Hands to join him in overthrowing the Master of Mankind. Furious at such a blatant act of duplicity, the Gorgon refused to aid such madness, and for his defiance let free the wrath of Fulgrim. Destroying the weapon he had once crafted as a gift of brotherly love, Fireblade with his hands of Necrodermis, the resulting explosion of the weapon proved sufficient to give Fulgrim the upper hand. Already manipulated by the demon of the Lair Blade, the Phoenician incapacitated the Primarch of the Iron Tenth and ordered his men to murder his Morlock honor guard. Awakening to find all but his first captain, Gabriel Santor, deceased and several vessels of his fleet crippled, the Gorgon resolved to lead the charge of the Emperor's Retribution fleet. As word reached the Master of Mankind of the betrayal of Isstvan III, delivered by the surviving loyal battle captain of the Death Guard, Nathaniel Garrow, further reports from Ferrus Manus of Fulgrim's betrayal galvanized the Loyalists' hunger for vengeance. Rogel Dawn, Magister Militant of the Emperor, commanded 8 legions including a contingent of his own men to crush the rebellion before it had a chance to fester, with 3 Primarchs at the spear tip of the assault. Vulcan, the Drake Lord of the Salamanders, and Corvus Corax, Raven Lord of the Raven Guard, pledged to fight alongside the Gorgon and his Iron Tenth, whilst meanwhile Fulgrim and the Dark Mechanicum prepared the world of Isstvan V for the impending assault. Aided by a second wave of legionary assault by the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Word Bearers, and Alpha Legion, any hope of victory for the traitors could not be achieved when set against such overwhelming firepower. An assumption which would cost the Loyalists dearly.
I can scarcely imagine what inspired Horus to this madness. In truth, the very fact of it frightens me. For if even the best of us can falter, what does that mean for the rest? Lord Manus will lead us in, 7 legions against 4. Horus will regret this rebellion.
Although a large contingent of the Imperial Fists had been dispatched to reinforce the Loyalist invasion, turbulent warp storms impeded the Sons of Dawn from entering the fray. Despite being diminished to the strength of 7 legions, the Retribution fleet of the Emperor, under supreme command of the Gorgon, would prove more than sufficient in quelling the traitor rebellion. With all haste, the Iron Hands, Salamanders and Raven Guard arrived within the Istvan system, unaware of the machinations of the ruinous powers, expediting their traversal through the warp to reach their target. The traitors had mustered upon the world of Istvan 5, yet reports of the desolate husk which had been its sister planet, Istvan 3, marked the blood already spilled within this accursed system of space. No traitor fleet was present, only a myriad horde of foes dug deep into the soil of the Urgal depression of Istvan 5, standards of the 3rd and 16th Legion proudly goading the Loyalists to attempt landfall. Already incensed from his encounter with the Phoenician, Ferrus Manus wasted no time in ordering his forces to combat the traitors. Their enemy was vulnerable, their forces still wounded from the purge of their own legions. Now was the time to strike. Yet unbeknownst to the Loyalists, a compact between the traitors and second assault of the Emperor's wrath had been made. Lorgar Aurelian, aboard his flagship, the Fidelitas Lex, enacted the next masterstroke of his plot to corrupt the Imperium to the thrall of chaos. Meeting with Primox Perturabo, Conrad Kurz, and Alpharius Omegon, the delegation listened to the honeyed words of the Urizen. Promising a new era under the rulership of a true emperor, imbued with the favor of the Dark Gods, Lorgar proclaimed that should they side with the War Master, each of their legions would be rewarded in kind. Declaring the phrase, "Death to the false emperor," the phrase uttered by the first captain of the Night Lord's Legion, Jago Sevatarian, resounds to this day as the rallying war cry of murderers, zealots, degenerates, and chaos filth across the galaxy. Whilst the second wave of reinforcements hurtled towards the Istvan system, unified in purpose, the Loyalists began their assault. In the opening salvo, the Loyalists bombarded the positions of Horus's rebels, the Emperor's wrath made manifest as Emperor's children, World Eaters, Death Guard and Sons of Horus, sheltered as best they could from the orbital bombardment. The first warning came when a dull, red-orange glow built behind the clouds, bathing the Urgal in a fiery light. Then came the sound, a low roar that built from a deep, thrumming bass to a shrieking whine. Alarms sounded, and the clouds split apart as individual streaks of light burned through and fell in a cascading torrent of fire. Thunderous explosions ripped along the edge of the Urgal, and the entire length of the War Master's forces were engulfed in a searing, roaring bombardment. For long minutes, the forces of the Emperor pounded the Urgal from orbit, a firestorm of unimaginable ferocity hammering the surface of Istvan 5 with the power of the world's end. Eventually, the horrific bombardment ceased, and the drifting echoes of its power faded, along with the acrid smoke of explosion. But the Emperor's children had performed perfectly in creating a network of defenses from which to face their former brothers, and the forces of the War Master had been well protected. From this vantage point in the alien keep, the War Master smiled, and he watched the sky darken once again as thousands of drop pods streaked through the atmosphere towards the planet's surface. The flames of war subsided, and with the traitors reeling from the bombardment, the Gorgon unleashed the legions of the Emperor. 3 noble sons of the Master of Mankind at the head of their vast legions took to the field. Vulcan combating the traitors' left flank, Corax striking from the right, and the Gorgon pushing to the center. Both sides of the fray were equal in size, for whilst the traitor legions had incurred losses from Istvan, The Salamanders and Raven Guard had a reputation as among the smaller forces of the Legiones Astartes. The Iron Hands formed the bulk of the assault, veterans of hundreds of compliances throughout the stars, and regarded as among the greatest legions, even by the War Master himself. Their stubborn taskmaster, epitomizing the Emperor's martial skill brought to bear, Ferrus Manus saw to the slaughter of thousands of traitor Astartes mere minutes following landfall. Progress was slow, yet the Loyalists could not relent in their aggression, knowing that reinforcements were imminent in supporting their attack. The Urgal depression ran thick with both Loyalist and traitor blood. Already the battle proved to be among the most bloody engagements seen since the Great Crusade. Loyal war machines of Legio Atarus, alongside the Iron Tenth, combated the Legio Mortis of the traitors, supported by armored divisions of the Sons of Horus and World Eaters. Wading through the thickest of fighting, the Loyalist Primarchs carved sways through the enemy lines, knowing that soon this bloody work would be over. For today, Primarchs of the Imperium would fall, yet not among the traitor ranks. Several word-bearer captains were shaking hands with their counterparts in the other legions, with more joining in every moment. They gripped wrist to wrist, a traditional warrior gesture to seal a pact. Argal Tal offered his hand to Sevatar. The Night Lord gripped the word-bearer's wrist as their emotionless faceplates met each other's eyes. "Death to the false Emperor," said Sevatar, becoming the first living soul to utter the words that would echo through the millennia. The curse was taken up by other voices, and soon it was being cried in full-throated roars. "Death to the false Emperor! Death to the false Emperor! Death! Death! Death!" The traitor Primarchs took to the field, butchering any within their path. Angron, Primarch of the World Eaters, sated the cravings of his chain axes, Gorechild and Gorefather, whilst Fulgrim laughed with glee as the keen edge of the Leia blade tore through the ranks of the Iron Hands. Mortarion harvested the lives of the Loyalists with arcing sweeps of his war scythe, Silence, yet no sight could be seen of the War Master. Watching the battle unfold from afar, the Lupercal smiled at the sight of the second wave of the Loyalist advance. Drop pods descended from the heavens, and the sky darkened as tens of thousands of shadows cast a pall over the Urgal depression. A cheer arose from the Loyalists as Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Word-bearers and Alpha Legionaries took to the field. Calling for medical aid from their newly arrived kin, the Salamanders and Raven Guard regrouped, yet received no confirmation of their calls, as the fresh Astartes looked on in grim silence. The traitors retreated from the battle, and with victory sealed in the name of the Emperor, the Gorgon charged after the Phoenicians' withdrawing forces. Separated from his allies, Ferrus Manus watched in horror as the Iron Warriors claimed the high ground of the depression and turned their guns on his men. All around, the reinforcements encircled, training their sights on Astartes clad in green, black and chrome. Whilst the Night Lords took up defensive positions with aid from the Word-bearers, the Iron Warriors and Alpha Legion would act as the hammer, driving the Loyalists to their respective anvil. Isolated from the Gorgon, Corvus Corax and Vulcan ordered their men to fall back, as a lone flare erupted from the fortress of the War Master. Volleys of bolter fire fell upon the Loyalists, trapped within the Urgal depression, killing hundreds of Astartes before the first magazines of their guns had been ejected. Returning to the fray, the bloody traitor forces from the first wave joined forces with the newly arrived legions and cut down the Iron Hands. First Captain Corferon, First Chaplain Erebus, and Lorgar Aurelian looked on with smug satisfaction at the massacre unfolding as a smile came close to forming on the Urizen's lips. Clutching the weapon made for him by the Gorgon, Illuminarum, Lorgar's mind felt a pang of doubt as he watched the Primarch of the Iron Tenth struggle for his life. Reassured by his adoptive foster father, Corferon, Lorgar ordered his legion to commit to the fray. Corax and Vulcan could not come to a consensus of how to salvage their armies. The Lord of Drakes suggesting a tactical withdrawal, followed by fortifying their positions, whilst the Ravenlord argued a full-scale escape effort. Such arguments would be ended by an artillery strike upon their position, and though the Ravenlord survived the blast radius, he found no trace of Vulcan. The Primarch of the Salamanders was missing. The Ravenlord had ordered his men to retreat, and the Iron Tenth were fully surrounded. All hope of victory, in the name of the Emperor, was lost. That day, we saw that even gods could die. Nothing was ever the same again. Not for the Primarchs, not for us. They were mortal, after all. Dozens of thousands of loyalists had fallen, with the Iron Tenth receiving the most casualties. The rage of Ferrus Manus was legendary among the Imperium, for he had not achieved the title of Gorgon for his compassionate disposition nor fair looks. Yet never before had Ferrus felt such betrayal, such loss of his men, or flagrant treachery. This sin committed by the War Master and his allies was unforgivable, and no matter how slim a chance, the Gorgon refused to die without claiming the head of he who had wronged him. Fulgrim took to the field, reveling in the slaughter of his once-cherished brother's armies and the whispers of the Lair Blade promising glory and satisfaction. The two demigods of war met in battle, their eyes locking as the merciless cruelty around them reached new heights of suffering. For a moment, the Phoenician faltered. The eyes of the Gorgon had never once been fueled by such hatred and never directed at his own gaze. Knowing that all chance for reconciliation lay dead, only through battle would either of them be freed from their bonds of broken brotherhood. Morlocks and Phoenix Guard clashed, their former campaigns as allies torn asunder and little more than fuel to sate their thirst for vengeance. Wielding the reforged weapon, Fireblade, Ferrus had pledged to end the life of his fallen brother with the gift he had once made in the name of fraternity. Fulgrim carried his own craft, Forgebreaker, retrieved from Ferrus during their previous encounter, which had been carried into every battle the Gorgon had waged since its creation. Today, a Primarch must die, and as the two clashed, the weapons once pledged to one another shook the earth as they impacted. As each traded terrible blows and further stoked the fires of anger within their hearts, the battle would come to an end as the Gorgon drew Fireblade within moments of slaying the Phoenician. Yet as Fulgrim let go of Forgebreaker and drew the blade of the Lair, he felt unnatural power course through his body. Reeling from the surprise renewal of strength, Ferrus blocked each strike from the Xenos relic until its tip pierced his breastplate. Falling to his knees, the Gorgon felt Fireblade slip from his grasp and looked up in horror at the transformed visage of his brother. In a moment of clarity, Fulgrim realized the mistake he had made when drawing the blade from its sheath, and fought to release it from his grip. Unable to unclasp his fingers from the weapon, the Phoenician struggled with the knowledge that he had fallen deep into the depths of corruption, as Ferrus reached for Fireblade. As fire reaved the Gorgon's weapon, the Lairblade moved as if of its own volition, its unnaturally sharp edge cleaving through the neck of Ferrus Manus, as Fulgrim desperately tried to pull the blow. The Gorgon was dead, and as the Phoenician cradled his brother's severed head in his arms, he knew that his own soul was forfeit to the whims of malevolent, thirsting gods. And the voice of his brother's blood shall cry unto him from the ground, and demand vengeance. The Raven Guard had pulled back from the killing field, yet would not be allowed to escape unscathed. The Word-Bearers, led by their zealous Primarch Lorgar Aurelian, could not allow the Ravenlord to take flight, and with his trusted lieutenants Cor Phaeron and Erebus at his side, attempted to clip the wings of the Raven Guard. The Gal Vorbak, twisted demon hosts of the 17th, attacked the Liberator en masse, yet despite their warp-twisted forms could not hope to best a Primarch. Unwilling to watch his most pious sons perish, the Rainmaker intervened, his anger stoked and blood risen. Of all the sons of the Emperor, Lorgar Aurelian was by far the weakest in martial skill, yet it was a bitter irony that his weapon once gifted by the Lord of the Iron Tenth cut down Loyalist Astartes as its maker lay cold and dead within the Urgal Depression. Corpses of ravens and zealots piled high as the two Primarchs waded through the hordes of their enemies, and soon the two came to blows. The Urizen had no hope of winning a duel with the Ravenlord, for the two sons of the Emperor had never been close and were almost strangers, further estranged for over 2 centuries since last they spoke. Releasing his long-repressed psychic power with careless abandon, energy reaved Lorgar as he demanded Corvus face him in battle. Crozius and Claw collided, the Urizen parrying vicious blows whilst the Ravenlord cleaved at the Rainmaker's neck. Cutting a gouge from Lorgar's face, the wound inflicted by Corvus was destined never to heal and forever mark the Urizen's visage. Impaling Lorgar through the chest with his lightning claws, Corax resisted the pain of the Urizen desperately crashing his head against his features, smashing the bones of his face. Tearing free his claws, moments before achieving the killing blow, a sadistic mirror of the Liberator stepped in. Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter of Nostramo, smiled as his own claws scraped against the ravens, a grim promise of murder etched on his features. Seizing Corax's wrist, Kurz attempted to prevent the Ravenlord from escaping, yet as he berated the bearer of the word, Corax took flight. Warning Lorgar that should he fail again, he would not save him, the Night Haunter looked upon the twisted forms of the Gal Vorbak with disgust. Commenting that his legion and his own character were malformed with corruption, even the monster of Nostramo detested the sight of the sons of Lorgar. Yet whilst the rewards of victory tasted bitter to many of the traitors, loyalists lingered among the ashes of war, for now began the hunt for the survivors of the massacre. Though the battle had ended and the enemy was far from the reach of our blades, most of us didn't come back from the Urgal Depression. Even those men who escaped, those pitiful few, even they didn't come back. They're still there now. We all are. Fighting for our lives. Resisting until the bitter end, the vast proportion of the remaining survivors of the massacre fought tooth and nail to slow the War Master's victory. Tens of thousands perished as the advance of Angron, Mortarion, and the Imperator-class Titan Dies Irae butchered and maimed anything in their path. Taking to the field, Horus Lupercal led his Justaeran Terminators to mop up any remaining holdouts of the Loyalist forces, his victory assured with 2 Primarchs slain and 1 broken and bloody. The Iron Warriors destroyed the Loyalist dropships, preventing escape to those within reach of salvation from the heinous butchery, whilst Night Lords, Wordbearers and Alpha Legionaries corralled the Loyalists into killing zones. The Raven Guard had suffered the least casualties, and as experts of hit-and-run tactics, proved the most adept at procuring vessels for their escape. Compassionate to a fault, the Salamanders, though bereft of their Genesire, assisted the Iron Hands in escaping the slaughter, as the stubborn sons of Medusa begrudgingly resolved to avenge their Genefather another day. Meanwhile, Vulcan and a contingent of his men fought on. Battered and bruised, the stalwart warriors of Nocturne proved their renown as soldiers, forged of mighty constitution. Unwilling to endure further casualties from the hammers of the anvils of war, the Iron Warriors ordered a tactical nuclear warhead to be fired upon the Lord of Drake's position. Atomizing the Primarch of the 18th and his men, the traitors had sealed their victory with excessive firepower, cunning, and cowardice. 200,000 Astartes had perished, a son of the Emperor had been slain, and 3 legions loyal to the Imperium had been annihilated. The master of mankind's dream of a united galaxy was dead. The War Master of the Imperium had secured a supreme advantage in the first stages of the Great Civil War, and the defenders of humanity remained scattered across the void. Warships of the Loyalists crashed onto the surface, their detonations creating vast craters and scars as they tumbled from orbit. World Eaters flensed their kills of flesh, constructing ossuary cairns from the skulls of the fallen, whilst Wordbearers conducted fell rituals using grievously wounded Astartes. Loyalists turned on their allies as madness and grief eroded their stoic countenance as the war machines of the traitor legios rooted out makeshift holdouts and rally points. Retrieving tens of thousands of progenoid glands from the dead, the traitors harvested these precious organs of the Astartes for their own grim purpose. Yet even in the darkest of days, glimmers of hope remained. Vulcan of the Salamanders, against all odds, had somehow survived the engagement, though with his discovery by the Night Haunter of Nostramo, soon languished as a prisoner of war. Small bands of resilient space marines of the now shattered legions formed bands of Warforged Brotherhood to harry the War Master's forces for years to come. The fleet in orbit of Istvan, though outmatched in firepower, lasted far longer than the engagement on the surface of the planet, facilitating escape attempts and destroying several traitor voidcraft in the hours following the conclusion of the ground war. For 20 solar days, the Loyalists had bitterly fought to preserve the honor of their legions, with the Ravenlord leading the survivors as they sought a means to escape the wrath of the traitors that remained. World Eaters, Sons of Horus and Iron Warriors scoured the ruin of Istvan V for prey, yet the Ravenlord refused to allow the extermination of his charges. Countering the purge of the Iron Warriors for solar weeks, after gathering much needed intel on their surroundings, the Deliverer proved worthy of his title. For 98 solar days, the Ravenlord orchestrated ambushes against the traitors, yet now a chance for escape presented itself within the Gular Salt Plains. Led by Captain Bran Neve of the Raven Guard, dropship reinforcements from Deliverance had come to their master's aid, and with haste extracted as many survivors as possible from the onslaught of the Red Angel, Angron. Watching the futile blood-crazed screams of the World Eaters as they departed from the surface, Corax demanded answers pertaining to how Bran had come to Istvan. Convinced by the Praefector of the Ferion cohort, Marcus Valerius, and his prophetic visions of ruin, the mortal of the 19th Legion's expeditionary fleet, though largely forgotten by history, had proven crucial in preserving the life and legacy of the Liberator. The voyage of 50,000 light-years, timely in its arrival, many valiant souls would be spared the blades and axes of the butchers of Nuceria. Whether these visions were imparted by the grace of the Emperor is unknown, yet the shattered legions, for all their losses, had been saved.
This is not victory. It is death. It is bonds broken and bloody, and it shall mark us all for generations. The traitor legions had galvanized into a force capable of sundering the Imperium, and following the Battle of Istvan V, had come close to extinguishing 3 entire Loyalist legions. The Loyalists were scattered, several legions were broken, and as the denizens of the Warp continued to entrap and harry warp travel, it would take 133 solar days for the survivors of Istvan V to return to the Sanctuary of Holy Terror. 2 loyal sons of the Primarchs had perished, and the remnants of the shattered legions were largely leaderless and diminished to only a few thousand souls. No battle waged in the name of the Imperium would ever eclipse the losses of the Astartes incurred from the Dropsite massacre, for such an engagement is less attributed as a battle, but rather a slaughter. The War Master's gambit had paid off, and with his victory achieved, the Lupercal rallied his remaining traitor brethren to his cause. Forming a conclave of the Primarchs, Horus now allied with Perturabo of the Iron Warriors, Conrad Kurz of the Night Lords, Alpharius Omegon of the Alpha Legion, and even Magnus the Red of the Thousand Suns, set his gaze upon the void.
9 legions stood at his banner, and it was now time to take their first steps to conquer the throne world. The forces of the 3rd, 12th, 14th and 16th legions would rendezvous at Mars to liaise with the Dark Mechanicum to aid in the Schism of Mars in order to resupply and bolster their armaments. The Night Lords departed to the planet of Sagwalza in order to delay the Dark Angels from countering the War Master's forces, whilst the Iron Warriors would confront their nemesis, the Imperial Fists, stranded within the Thal system. The Death Guard busied themselves with a mission to recruit the White Scars to the fold of the Traitor Rebellion, and the Alpha Legion had infiltrated the ranks of the Raven Guard and were also tasked with harrying the Space Wolves Legion. Whilst the Traitor Legions pilfered the armaments and war gear from the corpses of Istvan V, small Black Shield warbands amassed within the Void to combat the War Master's fleets. Unable to confront the traitors head-on, these bands of orphaned Astartes, regardless of their scale, continued to harry the War Master's supply lines and patrols. The heroism of such venerable legions, bolstered by grievous losses, the warriors of the Iron Hands, Salamanders and Raven Guard, refused to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. Surviving to the days of the 41st millennium as valiant champions of the Adeptus Astartes, their service, though among the most devastated, regardless endures to this day. Never again would the Imperium suffer such catastrophic losses to such a one-sided encounter. Yet news of the civil war of the Horus Heresy still remained unknown to many forces of the Imperium loyal to the Emperor, and they would not be spared further deception. Hundreds of inconsolable citizens of Terra threw themselves from the cliffs of the palace, or quietly took blades to their necks and wrists in the cold confines of their homes. On the American plains of Johannesburg, 7,000 men and women of a bioweapon storage facility exposed themselves to a pernicious strain of the newly developed Gangshi virus and perished in the flames of automated decontamination procedures rather than live in a world where the Emperor could be betrayed. When word reached the Diamantsland prison island, the inmates declared themselves loyal servants of the War Master and slaughtered their overseers. Regiments drawn from the Magyar Osirites mustered on the Meganesian heartlands, but the battle to retake the island would take many bloody weeks. All over the globe, the solid certainty of the Imperium's invincibility was crumbling, but worse was to come. As the sun reached its zenith above the hollow mountain and the shadows hid, word came that one of the Emperor's sons had fallen on the sands of Istvan V. Ferrus Manus, Gene-sire of the Iron Hands, was dead, slain, it was said, by the hand of his most beloved brother. This has been a tale of the great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. The losses incurred by the loyalists of Istvan V would never again be suffered by the Imperium. Many trials and tribulations lay ahead for humanity following this grievous wound, yet from the bleakest of nightmares shine the brightest of souls. Remember the fallen of Istvan V, for their sacrifice was not made in vain. Our Imperium stands to this day, emboldened by the hatred of betrayers and murderers. For self-sacrifice is never futile, so long as it is cherished by those who find salvation from its deeds. So never forget those who give life and limb to enable your well-being and prosperity.